Hi everyone, welcome to Active Self-Protection Extra. Today on John's Briefs with expert criminal defense attorney Tim Forshee. He's been on every side of court on this stuff. I want to talk about the use of any weapon, but in particular the use of your car as a deadly weapon, and how juries and the law treats this. To win the fight after the fight, you need help. After a use of force, I trust Firearms Legal Protection to help me win the fight for the rest of my life. From their 24/7 attorney-answered hotline to coverage for the use of all legal tools, Firearms Legal Protection has you covered. Get a discount by signing up at the link below. So we talk a lot on the channel about guns, right? Sure. As kind of my core firearms instructor, right? We talk about firearms use all the time. And clearly if you use a firearm, that is considered the use of deadly force. But we've recently seen several on the channel of people using cars. And in particular, this is an interesting one. I didn't actually prep Tim for this part. They recently changed the law in Brazil. And in Brazil, to stop moto robbers, they changed the law that if you see these two guys on a motorcycle all the time, and they'll roll up with one of the guys having a gun, and now killing those guys, if they roll up to get after someone, is considered a moral good in Brazil, and you can smash them with your car and face no charges. Like statutorily.
Isn't Brazil where we still have that the macho defense in murders against spouses? In
some cases, yeah, and they recently as well. I think a really interesting thing. They really lessened their gun control. So they allowed far more people to own firearms and carry them over the last 3 years, and their
crime rate has plummeted.
Their crime rate has plummeted for it.
Thank God.
And so that's a good thing. I think it's an interesting thing because the channel, my big channel, used to be about 23% Brazil. That's crept down to about 15%.
Really?
Less crime there.
Yeah, right.
It's going on
People
now.
Less interesting.
Which is interesting. So in the U.S. has gone up to it was 48%. Now it's about 53%. So anyhow, so what are your thoughts on the use of a car as a deadly tool? Does the jury look at that differently?
Well, it depends on the situation. I mean, a deadly tool is a deadly tool. Do they look at an iron versus a knife versus a gun differently? It's all going to be the evil in the heart of the person that wielded the weapon, really, I think. So, this is a little bit of a side, I didn't prep you for this, but I've been involved in some discussions with governmental folks, and I won't really say who, it doesn't really matter who.
Doesn't matter,
with regard to instituting red flag laws in the state of Arizona. And I know that's a subject for another day, but if you stay with me for 1 minute, I'll bring it back around. When we're having this discussion about red flag laws, of course, my main concern, and I'll bet yours and most rational people, is due process.
Due process.
You got to have due process. But my whole thing was, when we were having these discussions, I said, can we all agree that if a person has clearly stated an overt threat against their school or their business or their wife, and we know that they have a weapon, and due process is followed, and an impartial judge hears all the evidence and stuff, can we all agree that they probably shouldn't have guns? And everybody around the table is like, oh yeah. I said, okay, well then explain to me why we let them keep their vehicle. Because isn't a vehicle every bit as deadly as a firearm? We've seen lots of, lately, and in fact, my understanding is that Al-Qaeda is trying to influence people to use weapons of mass, use vehicles as weapons of mass destruction. We saw the guy in Nice, France that killed, I think, 59 on that boardwalk with a car. So if you're going to kill somebody with a gun, couldn't you easily kill somebody with a car as well? And so if we're going to take their guns away from them, shouldn't we take their cars away from them? And then the response to that is, oh my God, you can't take people's cars away from them. I mean, how are they going to get to work? It's like, but cars aren't protected in the Constitution, guys.
Right.
I mean, yes,
they perhaps are an unenumerated right to free travel, but we have an enumerated right.
Talk about the Commerce Clause if you want, but the point being is that yes, cars are just as deadly as guns, if not more so. I mean, the foot-pounds of energy of a 9mm bullet is about 400. The foot-pounds of energy of a F-150 going 60 miles per hour is about 2 million. So yes, cars are deadly weapons. Do juries view it different? I think probably they do. I think guns, there's a mantra amongst the anti-gun crowd that, guns are for killing. That's all they're for killing. Cars aren't. People don't view them that way, right? So I think you don't have that inherent stigma with a Chevy Impala that you have with an AR-15. Whether that stigma is appropriate, you and I would probably agree it's not, but the average juror is probably going to think that, well, yeah, that's just a car. Everybody's got a car. Right?
I mean, more people are killed via motor vehicle accidents.
15 times more each year, I believe. So yes, that's absolutely true. To answer your question as directly as I can, yes, I think probably I would expect that a jury would view the car differently, probably more favorably to my client than a gun.
Really?
In most
more
cases.
Favorably. So if I ran somebody over with a car that needed to be killed, let's just say they're pointing a gun at me or whatever, and I run them over with a car, you think the jury's going to see that better than if I shoot them?
If they're pointing a gun at you?
Yeah.
I think that here's what I always tell my students, and I've told clients this: if you're in a road rage situation, if you're in a car and there's somebody with a gun pointed at you, the best trigger you have available to you is not this one; it's your right foot.
Yeah.
So I mean, and again, if we put expert witnesses in there, could we show the jury that it was every bit as reasonable to run them over as to shoot them? I'm very sure that we could do that. What's their inherent prejudice? I don't think that people view hit and run the same way they do mass murder.
That's true.
You know?
That's true. So it's probably actually a lesser thing, which is kind of interesting because I think we've seen in the last couple, the use of knives is kind of opposite.
The use of a knife, and again, I'm reading what juries have told me after trials and what I've studied, and and you've studied about this stuff way more than I have, but knives kind of tend to be viewed as an offensive weapon, even though you and I would view it. I'm sure you're carrying a knife right now just like I am. I view that as like my last ditch go-to weapon, but more likely it's just the tool I use for opening packages or whatever it is. But I always have a knife, but it would never be my first thought as a weapon. Versus somebody who's going to try to rob you, the most available weapon to them is an edged weapon. And so we usually see knives used offensively. We rarely see them used defensively. And so I think there's an inherent prejudice when there's a knife. Wow, this guy had other alternatives. I mean, he was up to no good. I mean, the guy in the Las Vegas smoke shop comes to mind. Why would you proactively attack someone with a knife? It just doesn't sit as well. Yeah, so I agree with you.
So I've never seen, on camera at least, somebody who was carrying a gun use a knife in any defensive capacity.
I can't think of that ever.
I can't think of one. Now, I've seen people that, that's what was available, so that's what I used.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But I've never seen somebody who had a gun on them actually use a knife. If you've seen that and you have an actual documented instance of it, please send it to me. So recognize, and I think that this idea of, is a gun worse, a knife worse, a car worse? What is that going to look like? I think it varies community to community.
And a lawyer needs to acknowledge that, and God forbid it goes to trial. Part of your case better be explaining to the jury why a car is no worse than a gun, or why a gun is no worse than a car, or why a knife is no worse than a pipe. It's not the tool, it's what's in the heart of the person that wields the tool. Was I in fear for my life? But if the only thing I have available to me is to call in an airstrike, then call in the airstrike.
Look, if anybody's got a defensive A10 Warthog around,
let us know. We'd like a ride.
We'd love a ride. Well, and I think that's the big thing. Look, a deadly threat's a deadly threat's a deadly threat.
Right.
If it's somebody driving a car at me, threatening me with a lead pipe, standing in front of me, or pointing a gun at me, then that's a deadly threat.
Correct.
And once we reach that threshold of deadly, deadly is deadly. I'm not morally superior because I ran over a guy who needed to be run over versus whether I shot him.
I mean, tell me that there's not a certain amount of schadenfreude when you see a carjacker get run over by the car they're trying to steal.
Oh man, I have a great compilation that's coming on the big channel in a couple of weeks of it's a compilation of people running over motor robbers in Brazil.
I think most people look at that and they go, by God, you got what you deserve.
You're pointing guns at people and robbing them and kidnapping them and carjacking them.
I mean, it's horrific because you see the car go over the guy, you see it crush the motorcycle, and it's probably crushing his skull, and it's horrific. But there's that certain amount of schadenfreude where you go, yep, that guy got what he deserved.
What we say on the channel all the time is, look, they put the quarter in the jukebox, so they get to dance to the song.
They get to dance, yeah.
But I think that's a big thing. So, if you have to use deadly force, quite frankly, at the end of things, it doesn't matter what that version of deadly force looked like. And if you are in a legitimate fear of death or great bodily harm, use what you got available.
Amen.
Thanks so much, Tim.
Absolutely, always.